Rebecca Chen never imagined she'd be sleeping in her car at 34 years old. But there she was, parked behind a 24-hour diner in Portland, using their bathroom to brush her teeth each morning, before heading to the library to work on her laptop. Life had a funny way of humbling you when you least expected it. Just 6 months earlier, everything seemed fine. She had a decent apartment, steady freelance work as a graphic designer, and enough money to treat herself to coffee shop visits. Then her biggest client went bankrupt, owing her 3 months of unpaid invoices. Her landlord raised the rent by $400. Her old Honda needed a new transmission. It was like watching dominoes fall, one after another, until she had nothing left to hold on to. The eviction notice came on a Tuesday. She had 2 weeks to find a new place, but every apartment she looked at wanted first month, last month, and a security deposit. She did the math over and over, hoping it would somehow work out differently, but the numbers never changed. She simply didn't have enough. Her friends offered couches, but Rebecca couldn't bear the thought of being a burden. Her parents had passed away years ago, and her brother was overseas in the military. Pride was a strange thing. It kept you warm at night even when you had nowhere to sleep. So she packed what she could fit in her car, sold the rest for pennies at a yard sale, and joined the invisible population of working people who lived out of their vehicles. During the day, she maintained appearances. She showered at the gym, worked at the library, and dressed like someone who had their life together. At night, she was just another person trying to find a safe, quiet spot to park. The isolation was the hardest part. She couldn't tell anyone. When old friends texted asking to meet up, she made excuses. The shame felt like a weight on her chest, making it hard to breathe sometimes. This wasn't how life was supposed to go. She'd done everything right, worked hard, stayed responsible. Yet here she was. On a particularly rough evening, after spending the day applying to dozens of jobs and hearing nothing back, Rebecca sat in her car scrolling mindlessly through her phone. She wasn't even sure what she was looking for anymore. Hope, maybe. A sign that things could change. That's when she found it. A government auction website for abandoned properties. She'd never heard of such a thing before. But apparently when people stopped paying property taxes and couldn't be located, the government eventually seized and sold their land. Most of the properties were in terrible condition. Some were just empty lots. But they were cheap, really cheap. She started clicking through listings, not seriously considering buying anything, but just curious. There were plots of land in the middle of nowhere going for a few $100s. Burned-out houses that would cost more to demolish than to buy. And then she saw it. A cabin in rural Idaho, 200 square feet. Starting bid, $500. The photos made it look like something from a horror movie. The wooden siding was gray and rotting in places. The front porch had partially collapsed, leaving splintered boards sticking up at odd angles. Weeds and small trees had grown up around it, nearly swallowing the structure. One window was broken, covered with what looked like cardboard. The roof sagged in the middle like a tired old horse. Any reasonable person would have kept scrolling. But Rebecca stared at that photo for a long time. She enlarged it, studying every detail. Behind all that decay, she could see the bones of something solid. The main structure still stood. The roof, despite sagging, was still there. This wasn't just land. It was an actual building. Something with walls and a door that locked. It was shelter. She looked at her bank account. After paying for gas, her gym membership for showers, and the absolute minimum for food, she had $643 left. The auction ended in 3 days. The current bid was still $500, and there were no other bidders listed. Rebecca spent the next 3 days researching everything she could. She learned about Idaho property laws, about what it meant to buy property at auction, about the risks and the red tape. She looked up the county where the cabin was located, studied maps, and even called the local assessor's office, pretending she was just casually interested in the area. The property had been abandoned for over a decade. The last known owner had died with no heirs, and the property had cycled through various legal situations until the county finally took possession. There were no liens, no strange legal issues. It was just an old, forgotten cabin that nobody wanted. She told herself she was being crazy. The cabin was 8 hours away. It was probably even worse in person than in photos. She'd never done construction work in her life. She didn't know the first thing about fixing a house. But then she'd spend another night in her car, neck cramping from sleeping at an odd angle, and that cabin started looking better and better. At least it would be hers. Nobody could raise the rent. Nobody could evict her. It was solid ground, literally and figuratively. On the last day of the auction, Rebecca sat in the library with her laptop, watching the clock count down. Her finger hovered over the place bid button. $500. If she did this, she'd have less than $200 left to her name. If the cabin was completely uninhabitable, she'd have wasted the last bit of money she had. But what was the alternative? Keep sleeping in her car? Keep pretending everything was fine while she slowly ran out of money and options? With 2 minutes left in the auction, she placed her bid. $500. She held her breath, watching the screen, waiting for someone else to outbid her. Surely someone would jump in at the last second. That's what always happened in these things, right? The timer counted down. 1 minute, 30 seconds, 10 seconds, nobody else bid. When the screen flashed, "Congratulations, you won," Rebecca's hands started shaking. She'd just bought a house for $500. Or more accurately, she'd bought a falling apart cabin in the middle of nowhere that might not even have running water or electricity. She sat there in the library, staring at the screen, wondering if she'd just made the biggest mistake of her life or somehow stumbled into a solution. 2 weeks later, after handling all the paperwork and the title transfer, Rebecca loaded everything she owned into her car once again. But this time was different. This time she had an address, a destination. She had a key in her pocket that would open a door to something that belonged to her. The drive to Idaho felt endless. As she left the city behind and headed into rural territory, she had plenty of time to second-guess herself. What was she doing? She was a graphic designer, not a carpenter. She'd never even hung a picture frame straight, but she kept driving. When she finally turned down the dirt road leading to her property, following directions from a GPS that seemed confused about why anyone would want to go there, her heart was pounding. The road got rougher and she slowed down, afraid her old car wouldn't make it. Trees grew thick on both sides, blocking out most of the sunlight. Then she saw it. The cabin looked even smaller in person, and somehow even more run down than the photo suggested. She parked and just sat there for a moment, taking it all in. The reality of what she'd done was hitting her hard. She'd bought this. This was hers. Rebecca got out of the car slowly, approaching the cabin like it might collapse if she got too close. The porch creaked under her weight, and she tested each board carefully before trusting it. The front door was swollen from years of moisture and took some serious shoulder pressure to open. Inside it smelled like mold and decay. There was old furniture covered in dust and mouse droppings. The single room was tiny, with a smaller room off to one side that must have been the bedroom. A kitchenette lined one wall, the sink stained and the cabinets hanging crooked. It was horrible. It was perfect. It was home. Rebecca set down her bags, pulled out her sleeping bag and spread it on the floor in the least damaged-looking spot. As the sun set through the broken window, she lay there in the darkness of her $500 cabin and smiled. Tomorrow, she'd start figuring out how to make this work. Tonight, she'd just sleep under a roof that was actually hers. She had no idea that beneath the floorboards, just a few feet away from where she lay, was something that would change everything. The first week at the cabin was harder than Rebecca ever imagined. She woke up that first morning with her entire body aching from sleeping on the hard floor. Sunlight streamed through the broken window, and she could see dust particles floating in the air like tiny dancers. Everything looked even worse in the daylight. She spent that first day just taking inventory. The cabin had no electricity, which she'd expected. The water wasn't running, also expected. But what she hadn't expected was just how much work everything would need. The walls had holes. The floor felt soft and spongy in places, which couldn't be good. And the smell, that musty smell of abandonment, seemed to cling to everything. Rebecca made a list on her phone, trying not to feel overwhelmed. Clean out debris, fix the broken window, check the roof, figure out the water situation. Each task led to 10 more tasks. But she couldn't think about all of it at once. She'd just have to take it one step at a time. The nearest town was 15 miles away, a tiny place called Millbrook with a population of maybe 800 people. She drove there that afternoon to buy supplies. The hardware store was run by an older man named Gene who looked at her with open curiosity when she started loading up on cleaning supplies, work gloves, and trash bags. "You staying around here?" he asked, trying to sound casual but clearly dying to know her story. "Just bought the old Whitmore place," Rebecca said. Not sure if that's what locals would call it, but hoping he'd know what she meant. Jean's eyebrows shot up. That old cabin up on Ridge Road? Didn't think anyone would ever buy that place. Been sitting empty since, must be 15 years now. Longer than that, I think, Rebecca said. The last owner died in the 80s? That's right, old Tom Whitmore. Kept to himself, that one. War veteran, came back different like a lot of them boys did. Built that cabin himself back in 47, 48, somewhere around then. Jean rang up her purchases, shaking his head. You got your work cut out for you with that place, young lady. Rebecca couldn't argue with that. Over the next few days, she fell into a routine. Wake up with the sun, work on the cabin until exhaustion hit, eat something simple, then pass out in her sleeping bag. She started with the cleaning, hauling out decades' worth of accumulated junk, old newspapers from the 70s, broken furniture, rusted cans and bottles, mouse nests in the corners. It was disgusting work, but also oddly satisfying. Every bag of trash she hauled out made the place a little more livable. She found interesting things mixed in with the garbage. Old photographs of a stern-looking man in military uniform that must have been Tom Whitmore. A collection of small carved wooden birds, surprisingly detailed and beautiful. Antique tools that might actually be worth something. A manual typewriter that was probably broken but looked cool anyway. The people in Millbrook started warming up to her. The woman at the tiny grocery store, Linda, started setting aside day-old bread and discount produce for her. The guy at the gas station, Pete, gave her tips on winterizing the cabin since cold weather would hit in a few months. Even Jean at the hardware store started giving her advice without her having to ask for it. You're gonna want to check them floor joists, he told her one day. Old cabin like that could have rot or termite damage. Last thing you need is falling through your own floor. Rebecca hadn't even thought about floor joists, whatever those were, but Jean drew her a diagram and explained what to look for. That night she lay in her sleeping bag Googling how to inspect floor joists on her phone, grateful she could at least get a weak signal out here. 2 weeks into her renovation, she decided Jean was right. She needed to check under those floors. The bedroom area felt particularly soft, and she worried about what might be lurking beneath. She'd never done anything like this before, but YouTube had videos for everything, right? She bought a crowbar and a hammer. Back at the cabin, she started carefully prying up the floorboards in the small bedroom area. The boards came up easier than expected, which wasn't actually a good sign. It meant they were probably rotted. Underneath, she could see the floor joists Jean had mentioned. She shined her flashlight down there, checking for damage. Some of the wood looked questionable, but not as bad as she'd feared. She'd need to replace a few boards, but it wasn't a complete disaster. She was about to put the floorboards back when her crowbar caught on something. There was a scraping sound, metal on metal. Rebecca frowned and shined her light down into the gap again. There, wedged between two joists, was something that definitely wasn't supposed to be there. A metal box. Her heart started beating faster. She reached down but couldn't quite get her hand around it. Using the crowbar as leverage, she carefully worked the box loose. It was heavier than expected and covered in rust and dirt. The whole thing was maybe a foot long and 8 inches wide, made of some kind of heavy metal that had corroded over the years. Rebecca sat back on her heels, staring at the box. This was like something out of a movie. Who hides a metal box under their floorboards? What could possibly be in it? There was an old padlock hanging from the clasp, but it was so rusted that when she tugged on it, the whole thing crumbled apart. Her hands were shaking a little as she opened the lid. It creaked loudly, the hinges protesting after decades of being closed. Inside, wrapped in what looked like oilcloth, were several items. She carefully lifted out the first bundle. Inside were letters, dozens of them, tied together with string that had gone brittle with age. The envelopes were yellowed and fragile. She could see they were addressed to Thomas Whitmore from various people, postmarked from the late 40s and early 50s. The next bundle contained military medals. Rebecca didn't know much about military stuff, but these looked important. Bronze stars, ribbons in different colors, a Purple Heart. Tom Whitmore had clearly seen serious action during the war. Then she found the journal. It was a leather-bound book, the cover worn and faded but still intact. She opened it carefully, afraid the pages might crumble. The handwriting inside was tight and precise, written in pen that had faded to a rusty brown color. The first entry was dated July 15, 1945. Rebecca sat on the dusty floor and started reading. Tom Whitmore's words painted a picture of a young soldier in Germany right after the war ended. He wrote about the devastation he saw, the destroyed cities, the displaced people wandering around in shock. It was heavy stuff, and she could understand why he might have been different when he came back, like Jean had said. But as she flipped through the journal, one entry caught her attention. It was dated August 3, 1945, and it was longer than the others. Found something today in Munich. A painting in a bombed-out building, just lying there in the rubble. Beautiful thing. Seemed wrong to leave it there to be destroyed or stolen by someone who wouldn't appreciate it. A woman in a blue dress sitting by a window. Something about her face so peaceful despite everything around her being destroyed. I took it. Maybe I shouldn't have, but I did. Wrapped it up careful and sent it home with my things. When the time is right, I'll figure out what to do with it. For now, I'll keep it safe. Rebecca's breath caught. A painting? She quickly shuffled through the remaining items in the box. More letters, some old photographs, a few other personal items. But no painting. She kept reading the journal. Tom mentioned the painting several more times over the years. He'd kept it hidden, wrapped up, safe. He wrote about feeling guilty sometimes, wondering if he should try to return it. But to who? The building had been destroyed. He didn't know who owned it originally. In another entry, he wrote about how looking at the painting brought him peace during his nightmares. The last entry about the painting was from 1962. Still have the painting. Still safe. Maybe one day someone will know what to do with it. Until then, I keep it hidden where no one will find it. Rebecca looked around the small bedroom. If Tom had hidden a painting, where would it be? She'd cleaned out most of the cabin already and hadn't seen anything like that. She went back to the hole in the floor and shined her light around more carefully. Nothing. Over the next 2 hours, she searched everywhere. She checked the tiny closet, felt along the walls for hidden spaces, checked every corner and cranny. Nothing. Frustrated, she went back to the metal box and examined it more carefully. That's when she noticed it. The box seemed deeper on the outside than inside. She knocked on the bottom. It sounded hollow. Her hands trembling now, she ran her fingers along the seam. There was a false bottom. Using her fingernails and then a screwdriver when that didn't work, she carefully pried it up. And there it was. Rolled up tightly and wrapped in layers of protective cloth was a canvas. Even through the wrapping, she could tell it was old. Rebecca's heart was pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. She carefully, so carefully, unwrapped the outer layers of cloth. The canvas was rolled around a wooden dowel, the edges yellowed with age. She took it to the main room where the light was better, cleared off the old table and slowly unrolled it. The painting showed a woman in a blue dress, exactly like Tom had described. She sat beside a window, her face turned slightly toward the viewer. The style was old, classical, with rich colors that had faded a bit but were still vibrant. The woman's expression was serene, almost dreamlike. In the bottom right corner was a signature, though Rebecca couldn't quite make out the name. She sat down hard on the floor, staring at the painting. This had been hidden under the floorboards of her $500 cabin for decades. Tom Whitmore had taken it from Germany 80 years ago and never told anyone about it. Rebecca didn't know much about art, but even she could tell this was something special. The quality of the work, the age of it, the whole mysterious history. This wasn't just some random painting. This was something important. She pulled out her phone and took several photos. Then she sat there for a long time, just looking at the woman in the blue dress, wondering what secret she held and how a painting from a bombed building in Germany had ended up in a tiny cabin in rural Idaho. Whatever this was, Rebecca's life had just gotten a lot more complicated. Rebecca spent that entire night staring at the painting, unable to sleep. She'd carefully rolled it back up and placed it on the cleanest surface she could find, but her mind wouldn't stop racing. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw that woman's face so calm and peaceful. Who was she? Who had painted her? And why had Tom Whitmore felt the need to hide this for his entire life? By sunrise, Rebecca had made a decision. She needed to know what this was. She wasn't an art expert, had barely passed her art history class in college, but the internet existed for a reason. She took more photos in the morning light, trying to capture every detail, the signature in the corner, the style of the painting, the way the light hit the woman's face. Everything. She drove into Millbrook and parked outside the library, which doubled as the community center, and only had internet hours from 9 to 5. The librarian, Mrs. Patterson, was a sweet woman in her 70s who'd helped Rebecca get a library card her first week in town. "Well, good morning, dear," Mrs. Patterson said cheerfully. "You're here early today." "Got some research to do," Rebecca said, trying to sound casual even though her stomach was doing flips. She claimed a computer in the corner and started searching. First, she tried to make out the signature on the painting. It looked like it started with a K or maybe an R. The last name was longer, but the fancy script made it hard to read. She zoomed in on her photos, squinting at the screen. After about an hour of searching different variations, she found something. A German painter from the 1800s whose signature looked similar. His name was Klaus Bergmann, and he'd been known for portraits of wealthy families in Munich and the surrounding areas. Rebecca's hands started shaking as she clicked through images of his known works. The style matched. The way he painted fabric, the lighting, the composition, it all looked similar to her painting. But when she searched for paintings of women in blue dresses by Klaus Bergmann, nothing came up that matched exactly. She sat back, thinking. Tom's journal had said he found it in a bombed building in Munich in 1945. If this was a Bergmann painting, and it had been in Munich during the war, then maybe it had been lost or destroyed. Or maybe stolen. That thought made her stomach drop. Stolen. The Nazis had stolen thousands of artworks during the war. She'd seen movies about it, read articles. There were still people trying to recover family heirlooms that had been taken decades ago. Rebecca spent the next 3 hours falling down a research rabbit hole. She learned about art looting during World War II, about how Jewish families had their collections seized, about paintings that were still missing today. It was overwhelming and heartbreaking. She found a forum for art enthusiasts and history buffs. After creating an account, she posted her photos with a simple question. "Found this old painting in an estate. Any ideas about the artist or value? Signature looks like Klaus Bergmann?" Then she waited. And waited. She drove back to the cabin, made herself eat something even though she wasn't hungry, and checked the forum every 10 minutes on her phone. Finally, around 7 that evening, she got a response. Then another. Then 5 more in rapid succession. The first person said it looked like it could be a Bergmann, but they'd need better photos to be sure. The second person asked where she'd found it and if she knew the provenance. The third person said if it was real, it could be worth serious money. But it was the fourth response that made her blood run cold. This looked similar to a painting reported missing from the Rothstein collection in Munich. Looted in 1943. If this is authentic, you need to contact authorities immediately. This could be stolen property from the Holocaust. Rebecca stared at her phone screen, reading the message over and over. Holocaust, stolen property, authorities. This wasn't just some old painting Tom had picked up from a destroyed building. This was someone's family treasure, taken during one of the darkest periods in human history. She felt sick. What was she supposed to do with this information? She'd bought the cabin legally. She'd found the painting in her own property. But if it had been stolen from a Jewish family during the war, it wasn't really hers, was it? More messages came in. Someone posted a link to a database of missing art from World War II. Another person warned her that dealing with Nazi-looted art was complicated legally, and she should get a lawyer. A third person sent a private message saying they knew a dealer who would buy it, no questions asked, for cash. That last message made her feel even worse. Someone was literally suggesting she profit from what might be a family's stolen heirloom. The thought made her skin crawl. Rebecca didn't sleep again that night. She lay in her sleeping bag listening to the wind outside, thinking about everything. She thought about Tom Whitmore, a young soldier who'd probably been just trying to save something beautiful from destruction. She thought about the original owners, whoever they were, and what they might have lost. She thought about the woman in the painting, frozen in time, peaceful and unaware of all the chaos her image had witnessed. The next morning, she made another decision. She needed real help, expert help, not just internet strangers, but actual professionals who dealt with this kind of thing. She researched and found that the FBI had an art crime team. It sounded almost made up, like something from a movie, but it was real. They handled stolen art, forgeries, and trafficking. If anyone would know what to do with a potentially looted painting, it would be them. Her hand hovered over her phone for a full 5 minutes before she finally dialed the number. A professional-sounding woman answered, and Rebecca stumbled through an explanation of what she'd found. Let me transfer you to someone who handles these cases, the woman said calmly, like people called about hidden Nazi-looted art every day. The next person she spoke to was Agent Michael Torres. He listened to her entire story without interrupting, asked a few clarifying questions, then said something that made her heart sink. Ms. Chen, I'm going to need you to not touch the painting anymore. Don't move it. Don't try to clean it. Don't let anyone else see it. We're going to need to send a team out to examine it and verify its authenticity. A team? Rebecca said weakly. Like coming here? Yes, ma'am. This could be very significant. If this is the Rothstein painting, it's been missing for over 80 years. We'll need to coordinate with art historians and possibly international authorities. Rebecca gave him her address, such as it was. Ridge Road, the old Whitmore cabin about 3 miles past the turnoff to Millbrook. He said someone would be there within a week. After hanging up, Rebecca sat on her front porch and stared out at the trees. A week ago, her biggest problem was fixing a leaky roof. Now she had the FBI coming to her $500 cabin to investigate. A painting that might be worth who knows how much and rightfully belonged to a family that had lost everything. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd been homeless, desperate, with nothing to her name, and she'd somehow stumbled onto something that could be worth a fortune. But it wasn't really hers. It never had been. Jean found out about the FBI visit before Rebecca could tell anyone. That's how small towns worked. Someone had seen the government car drive through, made some calls, and suddenly everyone knew. He showed up at her cabin 3 days before the agents were due to arrive. Heard you got yourself into something interesting, he said, not quite looking at her. Rebecca laughed, but it came out bitter. That's one way to put it. Found something valuable? Maybe, probably, I don't know yet, she sighed. It's complicated, Jean nodded slowly. Tom Whitmore was a complicated man. Good man, mind you, but complicated. Whatever you found, I'm sure he had his reasons for keeping it hidden. I'm sure he did, Rebecca agreed. But that doesn't make it right. No, Jean said. I suppose it doesn't. When the FBI finally arrived, they came with 2 art experts from the Smithsonian. Rebecca watched from her porch as 3 black SUVs carefully navigated the dirt road. It looked completely ridiculous, like a presidential motorcade showing up at a shack. Agent Torres was younger than she'd imagined, maybe 40, with tired eyes that had seen too many complicated situations. The art experts were a married couple, Dr. Helena Voss and Dr. Richard Voss, both in their 60s and vibrating with barely contained excitement. Ms. Chen. Agent Torres shook her hand. Thank you for contacting us. I didn't really know what else to do, Rebecca admitted. They set up equipment in her tiny cabin, laying out protective sheets and positioning lights. Dr. Helena examined the painting first with just her eyes, barely breathing as she looked at every detail. Then came magnifying glasses, then some kind of special light that showed things invisible to the naked eye. Rebecca stood in the corner, feeling like an intruder in her own home. After 2 hours, Dr. Helena looked up, her face flushed. It's authentic. This is absolutely a Klaus Bergman original, circa 1862. The brushwork, the pigments, the canvas age, everything checks out. And the Rothstein connection? Agent Torres asked. Dr. Richard was scrolling through something on a tablet. The Rothstein family had their collection cataloged before the war. A painting matching this description, titled Woman in Blue, was listed in their Munich home. Seized by Nazi officers in March 1943. The family was sent to camps. Most didn't survive. The cabin went quiet. Rebecca felt tears burning in her eyes. Real people, real lives destroyed. Do they have descendants? She asked quietly. Agent Torres nodded. We've already started making contacts. There are 2 grandchildren, one in New York and one in Israel. We'll need to verify the chain of custody and ownership, but if this is indeed their family's painting, they have the strongest claim to it. Rebecca nodded, unable to speak. This was the right thing, she knew it was. But part of her couldn't help thinking about the timing. Finding something potentially worth millions right when she had almost nothing. The universe had a cruel sense of humor. Dr. Helena must have seen something in her face because she touched Rebecca's arm gently. You did the right thing calling us. Many people wouldn't have. I couldn't live with myself if I didn't, Rebecca said simply. They took the painting with them, promising to keep her updated. Agent Torres left his card, said there would be more questions, more paperwork. The legal process would take months, maybe years. And then they were gone, and Rebecca was alone in her cabin again. Alone with a hole in her floor and a story she could barely believe herself. The weeks after the FBI took the painting were strange. Rebecca went back to working on the cabin, replacing floorboards and patching walls, but her heart wasn't in it the same way. Every time she walked past the spot where she'd found the metal box, she thought about that woman in the blue dress and wondered where the painting was now. In some FBI evidence room? Being examined by more experts? She had no idea. Agent Torres called every few days with updates. They'd confirmed the painting was definitely the one taken from the Rothstein family. The pigments matched the time period. The canvas had been tested and dated to the mid-1800s. Every piece of evidence pointed to this being a genuine Klaus Bergman worth, according to preliminary estimates, somewhere between $4 and $6 million. $4 to $6 million. Rebecca couldn't even wrap her mind around that number. She'd bought the cabin for $500. She'd been sleeping in her car just 2 months ago, and she'd found something worth millions. But the story got more complicated. The descendants of the Rothstein family had been contacted, and that's when things got messy. There were 2 of them, like Agent Torres had mentioned. David Rothstein lived in New York, a retired accountant in his 70s. His cousin, Miriam Rothstein Levi, lived in Tel Aviv and was a university professor. They were the grandchildren of Benjamin and Rachel Rothstein, the couple who'd owned the painting before the Nazis took everything. David wanted the painting returned to the family. Miriam wanted it donated to a Holocaust museum. They couldn't agree, and according to Agent Torres, things between them were getting heated. There's another complication, Torres told Rebecca during one of their calls. German authorities are claiming the painting as cultural property that should be returned to Germany. And there's a question about the legal ownership of the painting based on Idaho property law. What does that mean? Rebecca asked, though she was afraid she already knew. It means you might have a legal claim to it. You purchased the property through a legitimate government auction. Everything in that property, including items found within it, could technically belong to you. We're seeing 3 different lawyers argue 3 different positions right now. Rebecca felt sick. I don't want to fight a Holocaust survivor's family for a painting that was stolen from them. That's not who I am. I understand, Torres said quietly, but I have to tell you, if you did pursue ownership, you'd likely have a strong case. The law is complicated here. After that call, Rebecca couldn't focus on anything. She drove into Millbrook and sat at the small diner, nursing a coffee she didn't want. Linda, the waitress who'd become something of a friend, slid into the booth across from her. You look like you're carrying the weight of the world. Honey, Linda said. Rebecca hadn't told anyone in town the full story, but rumors had spread anyway. Small-town gossip moved faster than the internet. She gave Linda the basic version, and watched the older woman's face shift from curiosity to concern. So you're saying you could be a millionaire, but only if you take something from people who already lost everything. Pretty much, Rebecca said miserably. Linda was quiet for a moment. What does your gut tell you? That it's not mine? That it never was? That some things are more important than money? Then you already know what to do, Linda said simply. But knowing what felt right and dealing with the reality of it were 2 different things. Because the media had gotten wind of the story. Rebecca didn't know how. Maybe someone at the FBI talked, maybe someone in Millbrook, but suddenly her phone was ringing constantly with reporters wanting interviews. News vans showed up at her cabin. People she'd never met had opinions about what she should do. The internet had a field day with it. Some people called her a hero for contacting the FBI. Others called her an idiot for giving up millions. There were think pieces about Nazi-looted art, about property rights, about the moral obligations of finders. Everyone had something to say. Rebecca stopped reading the comments after someone suggested she was only doing this for attention. Another person accused her of being greedy and trying to profit from the Holocaust. No matter what she did, someone was angry about it. The worst part was the interview request that came with money attached. A morning talk show offered her $5,000 to tell her story. A streaming service wanted to option her life rights for a documentary. People kept throwing money at her, wanting a piece of the story, and it made her feel dirty. She turned them all down except one. A journalist from a reputable newspaper wanted to interview her with no payment involved, just to tell the story accurately. Rebecca agreed, hoping it might help stop some of the wild rumors. The journalist, a woman named Patricia Kim, drove out to the cabin on a cold afternoon in early October. She was professional but kind, asking questions that seemed genuinely interested in understanding rather than sensationalizing. "Why did you call the FBI?" Patricia asked. "You could have just sold it quietly." Rebecca thought about that. "Because I knew what it probably was, and I knew that selling it would mean I was okay with profiting from someone else's tragedy. I'm not okay with that. I can't be okay with that and still look at myself in the mirror, even though you're struggling financially yourself." "Especially because of that," Rebecca said. "I know what it's like to lose everything. My struggle is nothing compared to what the Rothstein family went through. But I understand that feeling of having the ground ripped out from under you. I couldn't add to their pain just to make my own life easier." The article came out a week later. It was fair and honest, telling her story, without making her sound like either a saint or a fool. The headline read, "The $500 Cabin and the $1 Million Question of What's Right." After the article published, Rebecca got a phone call from a number she didn't recognize. A man's voice, older, with a thick accent she couldn't quite place. "Is this Rebecca Chen?" "Yes, who's calling?" "My name is David Rothstein." Rebecca's breath caught. She sat down hard on her front porch steps. "Mr. Rothstein, I'm so sorry for everything your family went through." "Hi, please," he interrupted gently. "I called to thank you. You didn't have to contact the authorities. Many people wouldn't have. You could have sold it and we'd never have known." Tears started running down Rebecca's face. "It wasn't mine to sell." "No, but you couldn't have known that for certain when you found it. You chose to do the right thing even when it cost you." He paused. "I read about your situation, about why you bought the cabin. You're struggling." "I'm managing," Rebecca said, wiping her eyes. "My cousin and I have been fighting about what to do with the painting," David continued. "She wants it in a museum. I want it back in the family. We've said terrible things to each other these past weeks. But we both agree on one thing. What you did deserves to be recognized." "I don't need recognition, Mr. Rothstein. I just wanted to do the right thing." "I know. That's why we want to do this." He took a breath. "When the painting is returned to us after all the legal matters are settled, we want to give you a finder's fee. 15% of whatever it sells for." Rebecca couldn't speak. 15% of $4 to $6 million that's between $600,000 and $900,000. "In case you're trying to do the math," David said, and she could hear a smile in his voice. "You gave us back a piece of our family history that we thought was lost forever. That's worth something. Mr. Rothstein, you can and you will. Miriam and I have already agreed. It's not charity, Rebecca. It's payment for a service rendered. You found our painting. You protected it. You made sure it came back to us. That deserves compensation." After the call ended, Rebecca sat on her porch for a long time, watching the sun set through the trees. $600,000 minimum. Maybe more. Enough to fix the cabin properly. Enough to start her design business back up. Enough to breathe. But the legal process still had to play out. German authorities were still claiming the painting belonged in Germany. There were international laws about cultural property to navigate. Agent Torres warned her it could take a year or more to sort everything out. In the meantime, life went on. Rebecca continued fixing up the cabin. Jean helped her replace the worst of the floor joists. Linda brought her leftover food from the diner. Mrs. Patterson at the library gave her old books about home repair. The people of Millbrook had adopted her as one of their own. One morning in late October, she got another call from Agent Torres. "There's been a development," he said. "The German government has withdrawn their claim. They've acknowledged that the painting was stolen from a German Jewish family and should be returned to the descendants. That removes one major obstacle. That's good news, right? Very good news. And there's more. David and Miriam Rothstein have reached an agreement. They're going to sell the painting at auction and split the proceeds, with a portion going to Holocaust education foundations, and they're insisting on the finder's fee for you. Their lawyers have already drawn up the paperwork." Rebecca's hands were shaking. "How long until the auction?" "Sotheby's wants it for their spring auction, probably April or May. There's still some authentication paperwork to finalize, but we're looking at maybe 6 months." 6 months. Rebecca could handle 6 months. She'd handled worse. That evening, she built a fire in the wood stove she'd managed to get working. The cabin was starting to feel like a real home. The walls were patched, The floor was solid, and she'd even fixed the broken window. It wasn't much, but it was hers. She thought about Tom Whitmore, who'd built this place with his own hands after coming home from a war. He'd hidden that painting for decades, maybe wrestling with guilt, maybe not knowing what to do with it. In his journal, he'd written that someday someone would know what to do. Maybe she was that someone. Rebecca pulled out her laptop and started working on a new design project. Her first real client work in months. Someone from New York had reached out after reading the article, wanting to hire her. The money wasn't much, but it was a start. Outside, the first snow of the season started to fall, dusting the trees and the roof of her $500 cabin. Inside, Rebecca Chen smiled and kept working, knowing that sometimes doing the right thing took time, but it was always worth the wait. Winter in Idaho was brutal. Rebecca learned that the hard way. The cabin, despite all her repairs, wasn't exactly built for modern comfort standards. Cold air snuck in through gaps she couldn't find. The wood stove kept the main room warm, but the bedroom was like a freezer. Some mornings she woke up and could see her breath, but she made it work. Jean helped her install better insulation. She bought thick curtains from a thrift store 2 towns over. She learned to dress in layers and keep a thermos of hot coffee next to her bed. The struggles made her appreciate every small victory, every degree of warmth she managed to capture. The waiting was the hardest part, knowing that in a few months her life might completely change, but having to live in the uncertainty until then. She tried not to think about the money too much, tried not to count on it until it was real. She'd learned the hard way that life could pull the rug out from under you when you least expected it. Christmas came and went quietly. Linda invited her to dinner with her family, and Rebecca almost cried at the kindness of it. These people barely knew her 6 months ago, and now they treated her like family. That was worth more than any painting. In January, Agent Torres called with an update. The painting had been fully authenticated and was being prepared for auction. Sotheby's was planning a major spring auction of recovered art, and the Rothstein painting would be the centerpiece. The estimated value had gone up. They were now talking about $5 to $7 million, maybe more depending on bidding. There's significant interest already, Torres told her. Museums, private collectors. This painting has a story now which makes it even more valuable. The history, the recovery, everything. Rebecca felt strange about that. The painting's value had gone up partly because of what she'd done, because of the story. It felt weird to profit from that, even though the Rothsteins insisted she deserved it. February brought more snow and more waiting. Rebecca had started taking on design clients again, working from her laptop at the cabin. The weak internet signal was frustrating, but she managed. She was slowly rebuilding her professional life, one small project at a time. She also started something new. With some of the money from her design work, she bought cheap materials and started fixing up other parts of the cabin. Not just making it livable, but making it beautiful. She sanded down the old wooden walls until they glowed. She painted the trim a soft white. She found an old mirror at a yard sale and hung it to make the space feel bigger. The cabin was transforming, and so was she. The woman who'd slept in her car last year felt like a different person. That woman had been desperate and afraid. This woman was learning to build something from nothing, literally and figuratively. In March, she got an invitation in the mail. Sotheby's was inviting her to the auction. They'd cover her travel costs, put her up in a hotel in New York. David and Miriam Rothstein wanted to meet her in person. Rebecca stared at the invitation for a long time. New York City. She'd never been. The thought of flying across the country, staying in a fancy hotel, attending an auction where millions of dollars would change hands, it all felt surreal. She called Agent Torres. "Is this real? This is really happening?" He laughed. "It's really happening. The auction is set for April 15th. You should go. You're part of this story." So she went. Linda helped her pick out an outfit from the thrift store, something appropriate for a fancy auction. Mrs. Patterson gave her a pep talk about holding her head high. Jean slipped her $100, just in case you need it, even though she tried to refuse. The flight alone was overwhelming. Rebecca had only flown twice before, both times years ago. She sat by the window and watched Idaho disappear beneath clouds, heading toward a city she'd only seen in movies. New York was chaos. So many people, so much noise. Buildings so tall they blocked out the sky. The hotel Sotheby's put her in was nicer than anywhere she'd ever stayed. The bed was enormous. The bathroom had marble counters. She felt completely out of place and couldn't stop smiling about it. The night before the auction, she met David and Miriam Rothstein for dinner. They'd chosen a quiet restaurant in Midtown, nothing too fancy, which Rebecca appreciated. She was nervous walking in, but David stood up as soon as he saw her and pulled her into a hug. "Rebecca," he said warmly, "finally we meet in person." David was exactly as she'd imagined from their phone calls. Gentle eyes, gray hair, a kind smile. Miriam was smaller than her cousin, with sharp features and an intensity that was a bit intimidating at first. "You're younger than I expected," Miriam said, shaking Rebecca's hand. They sat down, and for a moment nobody knew what to say. Then David laughed, breaking the tension. "This is strange, isn't it? We're about to sell a painting worth millions that none of us had seen until a few months ago. All because you bought a cabin for $500. When you put it like that, it sounds completely insane," Rebecca said, and they all laughed. Over dinner they told her about their family history, about Benjamin and Rachel, their grandparents, who'd owned a textile business in Munich, about how successful they'd been before the war, how they'd loved art and music and filled their home with beautiful things, about how they'd lost everything, including most of their family in the camps. "We only have a few photographs," Miriam said quietly. "A handful of letters. That's all that survived. So to have this painting back, something our grandparents loved, something that hung in their home." Her voice broke. Rebecca felt tears in her own eyes. "I'm so glad I could help bring it back to you." "You did more than that," David said. "You reminded us that there are still good people in the world. People who do the right thing even when it costs them." They talked for hours, about the cabin, about Rebecca's struggles, about what she planned to do with the money. She told them she wanted to renovate the cabin properly, start a business helping people restore old properties, and set up a scholarship fund for art students. "Tom Whitmore found that painting," Rebecca said. "And in a weird way, it found me. Maybe it's meant to help other people now. Keep the good going, you know?" Miriam reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "Our grandparents would have liked you." The auction the next day was like nothing Rebecca had ever experienced. The room was full of wealthy-looking people in expensive clothes. She sat with David and Miriam, feeling completely out of her element but grateful to be there. The painting came up as Lot 17. When they unveiled it, Rebecca gasped. She'd seen it in her cabin by flashlight and phone light, but here, properly lit and displayed, it was breathtaking. The woman in the blue dress seemed to glow. The bidding started at $2 million. Within minutes, it was at $4 million, then 5. The auctioneer's voice was rapid-fire, calling out bids. Rebecca couldn't keep track of who was bidding, just watched the numbers climb higher and higher. 6 million. 7 million. Finally, the hammer came down at $7.2 million. The room erupted in applause. Miriam was crying. David was shaking his head in disbelief. Rebecca just sat there, stunned. 15% of $7.2 million was $1,080,000. She was a millionaire. A museum in Vienna had won the painting. They planned to display it in a special exhibit about recovered Holocaust art, with a plaque telling the full story, including the Rothstein family and Rebecca's role in its recovery. The next few weeks were a blur of paperwork and legal processes, but eventually the money came through. Rebecca stared at her bank balance, at numbers she never thought she'd see attached to her name. She flew back to Idaho and drove straight to the cabin.